It's funny how you can measure the end of a world in seconds. For me, the world I knew, the one where I was Ethan Walker, husband, project manager. A guy who mowed his lawn on Saturdays, ended in the 20 seconds it took for my wife, Lena, to unlock her phone, swipe through her photo gallery, and land on an image I never intended for anyone to see. Our marriage of 8 years hadn't been a fairy tale, but it had been solid. It was built on the comfortable bedrock of shared routines, inside jokes that were no longer funny but still obligatory, and the quiet agreement to not look too closely at the parts of each other that didn't fit the blueprint. We were, I thought, happy in that muted suburban way. We had a mortgage, a joint bank account, and a favorite Thai takeout place. It was a life painted in shades of beige, and I had convinced myself that beige was a soothing color. The day it all fell apart was a Tuesday. I remember the light outside was that tired, grey kind you get in late autumn, and the house was filled with the smell of the chicken roasting in the oven. Everything was normal. Deceptively normal. I was on the couch, scrolling through work emails on my laptop, and Lena was across from me in her favorite armchair, a glass of white wine sweating onto the coaster beside her. She'd been quiet for a few minutes, that kind of focused quiet that means she's either balancing our budget or has found something interesting on the internet. Then, she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. "Ethan." I looked up. "Yeah." She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on her phone, her expression unreadable. She held it for a moment longer, then placed it face up on the polished surface of the coffee table between us. She didn't slide it or toss it. She placed it with the deliberate, careful motion of someone laying down a winning poker hand. "What time did you take this?" she asked. My heart didn't just drop. It felt like it was yanked out of my chest by a hook. I leaned forward, my own reflection briefly ghosting across the screen before the image underneath resolved itself. And there I was. It wasn't a picture of me with another woman. It wasn't a screenshot of some incriminating text message. In some ways, it would have been easier if it had been. Betrayal is a language most couples understand, a script with predictable scenes of anger, tears, and eventual, if painful, resolution. This was something else entirely. The picture showed me Ethan Walker, sitting on the edge of our bed. The lighting was soft, coming from the bedside lamp, casting long shadows that made the room look both intimate and vast. I was wearing a bodysuit made of a deep wine-red lace. It clung to my torso, the delicate pattern a stark contrast to the musculature of my shoulders and chest. My legs, which I'd painstakingly shaved until they were smooth, were encased in black silk stockings that ended high on my thighs, held in place by a garter belt I'd hidden in the back of my sock drawer. On my feet were a pair of sharp stiletto-heeled pumps, so shiny they reflected the lamplight like pools of black ink. But the most damning part wasn't the clothes. It was my face. I wasn't grimacing in shame or caught in some perverse, hidden act. My expression was calm, focused. My hands were resting on my thighs, my posture poised. And if you looked closely, you could see it in the slight curve of my lips, in the relaxed set of my jaw. I was happy, genuinely, peacefully happy. It was a secret, solitary joy, and the camera had caught it in amber. I must have taken it a few weeks ago on a night Lena was out with her friends. I'd used the self-timer, propping the phone up on the dresser. I'd meant to delete it. I'd thought I had deleted it. But the cloud, that insidious, invisible archive of all our modern sins, had saved it, and somehow, it had synced to her phone. The silence in the room stretched, thin and tight. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like hammer blows. I started, but my throat was dry. What could I possibly say? It was a lie. A joke. A dare from a friend. Every excuse that scrambled through my brain sounded pathetic and transparent. Lena's eyes finally lifted from the phone and met mine. I braced myself for the storm, for the shouting, the accusations, the tears. I was ready for anger, for disgust, for heartbreak. What I wasn't ready for was the look in her eyes. It wasn't fury. It was a chilling, analytical curiosity. It was the look a scientist gives a specimen under a microscope. She tilted her head, a gesture I used to find charming. Now, it felt like a predator sizing up its prey. "That lace doesn't look cheap," she said, her voice even. It wasn't a question, it was an observation, an appraisal. I just stared at her, my mind a blank wall of white noise. "What size are those shoes?" she asked, her gaze flicking back to the phone. 11, I heard myself say, the word a traitorous whisper. Men's 11 or women's 11? Women's. She nodded slowly, as if confirming a hypothesis. The oven timer beeped from the kitchen, a shrill, cheerful sound that was utterly obscene in the context of the moment. Neither of us moved. Then came the final question, the one that sealed my fate. "Where do you keep them?" "Ethan." My blood ran cold. It wasn't about the act anymore. It was about the logistics, the secrecy, the hidden world I had built within the walls of our shared life. She wasn't just asking about the clothes in the picture. She was asking about all of it. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. A pathetic, silent plea. But Lena was already standing up. She moved with a purpose I hadn't seen in her for years. She walked past me, not even glancing in my direction, and went straight to our bedroom. I followed, my feet feeling like lead blocks, my body moving on some morbid autopilot. She didn't ransack the room. She was methodical. She scanned the closet, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She ran a hand along the top shelf, tapped the back wall. Then she knelt, her fingers tracing the edge of the rug at the bottom of my side of the closet. She pulled it back, revealing the darker hardwood floor beneath. She knocked on the boards. Once. Twice. The third knock produced a slightly hollower sound. Using her perfectly manicured nails, she pried at the edge of the board. It came up with a soft groan of protest. And there, nestled in the dark space between the floor joists, was my secret, a metal trunk, about the size of a shoebox, but deeper. It wasn't locked. I'd never thought I'd need a lock in my own home. She lifted it out and placed it on the bed. For a moment, she just looked at it, then at me. Her expression was still unnervingly calm. Then, she lifted the lid. The contents of my hidden world spilled out into the soft light of the bedroom, a cascade of textures and colors that had no place in the life of Ethan Walker. Silk stockings in black, nude, and cream, neatly rolled and tied with ribbons, a few pairs of lace panties, 2 bras, chosen more for their aesthetic than for any hope of them fitting properly, a simple black slip dress, a pleated A-line skirt in a soft grey wool, a bottle of women's perfume, a light floral scent that I only ever wore when I was alone, a small collection of hair clips and a silk scarf. It was my entire collection, the sum total of a part of me I had kept buried for my entire adult life. I waited for the verdict, for the explosion, for the marriage to finally, officially, detonate. Instead, Lena reached into the box and picked up a silk stocking, rubbing the material between her thumb and forefinger. She examined the delicate weave, the reinforced toe. She was assessing its quality. Then, she looked up at me, and she smiled. It wasn't the warm, gentle smile I had fallen in love with 8 years ago. It wasn't a smile of forgiveness or understanding. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed the keys to a kingdom they never knew existed. It was a smile of discovery, of opportunity, and most terrifyingly, of power. In that moment, I understood. My old life wasn't just ending. It was being dismantled, and a new one was about to be built in its place. And I wouldn't be the architect. The days that followed the discovery were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Lena didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't pack a bag or call her mother. She simply let the silence fester. The metal trunk sat on the dresser in our bedroom, its lid open, a constant, silent accusation. We moved around each other like strangers, the air thick with unspoken words. The beige walls of our life now felt like the padded walls of a cell. I was a wreck. At work, I'd stare at spreadsheets, the numbers blurring into meaningless squiggles. I'd sit in meetings, nodding and pretending to listen, while my mind raced, replaying that moment in the living room over and over. Every scenario I imagined ended in disaster, divorce, public humiliation, losing everything. I was living on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the final push. The push came on a Friday night, almost a week after she'd found the picture. I was washing the dishes, my hands submerged in hot, soapy water. When she walked into the kitchen, she leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "We need to talk about this," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, the voice she used with difficult clients at her marketing firm. I turned off the water, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. I dried my hands on a towel, my movements stiff and jerky. "Lena, I am so sorry. I can explain. I'll throw it all away. I'll do anything." She held up a hand, stopping my pathetic flood of words. "No, you won't." I stared at her, confused. "I've been thinking about this," she continued, her eyes never leaving mine. "And I've realized something. I'm not angry that you do this, Ethan. I'm angry that you did it behind my back. I'm angry that you hid it from me. Like it was some dirty little secret." I didn't know what to say. This was not the script I had prepared for. "I don't like the idea of you doing this alone, in secret," she said, pushing herself off the counter and taking a step closer. "It feels unseemly. So we're going to set some new rules." My mind was reeling. Rules. "From now on," she said, her voice dropping slightly, gaining a new layer of authority. "You don't do this by yourself. You don't buy anything without my approval. You don't wear anything unless I choose it for you. From now on, I decide." The finality in her voice was absolute. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. She was taking control, not by forbidding my secret, but by co-opting it, by absorbing it into our marriage and reshaping it under her command. It was a move so strategically brilliant, so utterly unexpected, that it left me breathless. I was being offered a strange kind of amnesty, but the price was total surrender, sire. And God help me, in that moment, a part of me felt a profound, terrifying sense of relief. The burden of the secret, the years of hiding and shame, felt like it was lifting. I was so tired of fighting it, of pushing it down. And here was Lena, not just acknowledging it, but offering to manage it. All I had to do was let go. I gave a single, jerky nod. It was all the consent she needed. The first evening of my new life began the next night. After dinner, Lena simply said, "Come with me." She led me not to the bedroom, but to the master bathroom. The lights were bright, the white tiles gleaming. It felt clinical, like an operating room. On the counter, she had laid out a series of items I didn't recognize. A tub of what looked like cream, a plastic spatula, and a bottle of lotion. "Take off your pants," she said, her tone matter of fact. I hesitated for a second, then complied, my hands fumbling with my belt buckle. I stood there in my boxer shorts, feeling exposed and foolish. "All the way," she said, not looking at me. Busy opening the tub of cream, I stripped completely, standing naked on the cold tile floor. "Step into the shower," she instructed. I did as I was told, the porcelain cold against the soles of my feet. She picked up the tub. It was a chemical depilatory cream. Hair remover. "This is step 1, she announced. "A woman does not have hairy legs." My stomach clenched. A woman. She'd said it so casually. She came into the shower stall with me, holding the spatula. The cream was cold as it touched the skin of my calf, and I flinched. The smell was acrid, chemical. She worked with an efficient, impersonal focus, slathering the thick, white paste from my ankles all the way up to my thighs. She covered every inch, her movements precise. I stood perfectly still, my arms crossed over my chest, a cold knot of dread, and something else, something I couldn't name, tightening in my gut. "We wait 10 minutes, she said, stepping out and setting a timer on her phone. The 10 minutes were the longest of my life. I stood there, covered in cooling chemical paste, the smell stinging my nostrils. I watched the hair on my legs, the familiar masculine hair that had covered them since puberty, begin to shrivel. It was like watching a part of myself dissolve. When the timer went off, Lena handed me the spatula. "Scrape it off, against the direction of the hair growth." I did as she instructed. The cream came away in clumps. And with it, my hair. It fell in wet, dark mats to the shower floor, swirling around the drain. A part of my body, a part I had never questioned, was just gone. When I was done, she told me to rinse. The water sluiced away the last of the cream and the fallen hair, leaving behind skin that was shockingly bare. She handed me a towel as I dried myself. I couldn't stop touching my legs. They felt alien. The skin was incredibly smooth, almost slick, without the familiar roughness of hair. They felt lighter, more vulnerable. I didn't know if I hated the feeling or if, in some strange way, I felt a sense of release. It was as if a heavy, scratchy coat I didn't even know I was wearing had been taken off. But the next step was the corset. Lena retrieved it from the trunk. It was a beautiful, formidable thing of silver-grey satin, reinforced with what I knew was steel boning. It looked like a piece of historical armor. She held it up. "Turn around." I turned, my back to her, my newly bare legs feeling strangely cold. I placed my hands on the bathroom counter, bracing myself. The corset was cold against my skin. She wrapped it around my midsection, hooking the clasps at the front with practiced efficiency. Then, she took hold of the long laces at the back. "Breathe in," she commanded. I took a deep breath, and she pulled. The sensation was immediate and shocking. It was a powerful, unyielding compression that squeezed the air from my lungs. My entire torso was being reshaped, cinched inward with relentless pressure. Again, she said. I gasped in another breath, and she pulled the laces tighter still, her knuckles brushing against my back. I could feel my waist being forced into an unnaturally narrow shape. It was hard to breathe. My posture was instantly, rigidly corrected. Slouching was a physical impossibility. "Stand up straight," she said, her voice close to my ear. "Women don't slouch." That word again, women. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just dressing me up. She was redefining me, one instruction at a time. The pressure of the corset was immense. It wasn't exactly painful. Not yet. But it was an overwhelming physical presence. I was intensely, suffocatingly aware of every inch of my own body, of the space it was no longer allowed to occupy. I felt constrained, controlled, and yet, in the deepest, most confusing part of my soul, I felt a strange sense of rightness. This rigid, upright posture, this forced grace, it felt like an answer to a question I had never dared to ask. She tied off the laces with a firm, final knot. There. Now you have a shape. She turned me around to face the mirror. The man who stared back was a grotesque parody. A naked, hairless torso squeezed into an hourglass shape, my stomach flat, my waist cinched. It was alien and deeply unsettling, but Lena wasn't looking at my face. She was looking at my silhouette, her head tilted with the critical eye of an artist. "It's a start," she said, her voice filled with a satisfaction that chilled me to the bone. The next evening, the ritual continued. Lena led me to the bedroom. She had set up a space at her vanity table, clearing away her own things and laying out a new arsenal of brushes, palettes, and tubes. The metal trunk was open on the bed, its contents waiting like a costume for a play I hadn't auditioned for. "Sit," she said, pointing to the velvet-topped stool. I sat. The corset was already on, a constant, tight embrace under my t-shirt. I had worn it for a few hours the previous night, and the ghost of its pressure had lingered all day. A secret reminder beneath my work clothes. Lena began with my face. The process was slow, methodical, almost ceremonial. She started with a primer, her cool fingers smoothing the gel over my skin. Then came the foundation. She used a sponge to apply it, dabbing and blending with intense concentration. I watched in the mirror as the faint stubble from my morning shave, the slight ruddiness of my cheeks, the masculine angles of my jaw were all softened, blurred, and then erased under a flawless, creamy canvas. I was becoming a blank slate. She moved on to my eyes. This was the most unnerving part. She used tweezers to pluck a few stray hairs from my eyebrows, shaping them into a more defined arch. The tiny stings were sharp, making my eyes water. "Don't move," she chided softly. Then, with a fine-tipped brush, she applied eyeliner along my upper lash line. Her touch was steady, confident. She was drawing a new person onto my face. The dark line made my eyes seem larger, more defined, and somehow more watchful. Mascara followed, coating my lashes, making them look longer and thicker than I ever knew they were. Finally, she chose a lipstick. It was a soft, neutral pink with a hint of nude. The texture was creamy and warm as she carefully painted it onto my lips, defining the shape, filling them in. The faint, sweet smell of it filled my senses. When she was done with the makeup, she stepped back to admire her work. I stared at the reflection. It was my face, but it wasn't. The bone structure was mine. But the skin, the eyes, the lips, they belonged to a stranger, a soft, androgynous stranger with a bewildered expression. The final piece was the hair, from the trunk. She lifted a wig. It wasn't a cheap, shiny party store wig. It was made of real hair, a rich dark brown that cascaded in soft waves just past the shoulders. She carefully placed it on my head, adjusting it, tucking my own short hair underneath until none of it was visible. She brushed it out, arranging the waves so they fell gently around my face. The transformation was complete. The person in the mirror was no longer me. The makeup and the hair had tipped the scales. The face was soft, the eyes large and dark, the lips full and colored. The long hair framed the face, hiding the width of my jaw, creating an illusion of delicacy. It wasn't Ethan anymore. Lena stood behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders. We both looked at our reflections in the mirror. "Hello," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Welcome, Elle." The name landed in the quiet room with the weight of a stone. Elle. She hadn't asked me. She had pronounced it. She had christened this creation. And the terrifying thing was, it fit. It fit the face in the mirror in a way Ethan never could. A tremor ran through me, a violent shudder of fear and shame. But underneath it, so faint I almost missed it, was a flicker of something else, a spark of recognition. For my entire life, I had felt like I was wearing a costume, playing the part of a man. The suit and tie, the deep voice, the firm handshake, it was all a performance. Now, wearing what was so obviously a costume, for the first time in my life, I felt a sliver of authenticity. I wasn't just cross-dressing. I wasn't just pretending. For the first time, I felt like I was being seen. Lena hadn't just found my secret, she had given it a face and a name. My life split in two. From Monday to Friday, I was Ethan Walker. I put on my button-down shirts and my slacks, went to the office, and spoke about deadlines and deliverables. I was a ghost, haunting my own life. My movements stiff, my voice feeling like a borrowed thing. The secret knowledge of what awaited me at home was a constant hum beneath the surface of my mundane reality. Then came the weekend, and on Friday evening, Ethan ceased to exist. Elle took his place. At first, that was the rule. Ella was a creature of the weekend, confined to the house. Lena became my tutor, my director, my handler. She was remaking me from the ground up, and her attention to detail was relentless. "You walk like a soldier," she told me one Saturday afternoon as I crossed the living room. I was wearing a pair of low, 2-inch heels she had ordered. They felt impossibly awkward. "You're putting your whole foot down at once. It's heel. Then toe. Shift your weight. Let your hips move." She made me walk back and forth across the polished hardwood floor for an hour, my ankles aching, my calves burning, until the clumsy, stomping gait was replaced by something softer, something with a slight, tentative sway. Sitting was another lesson. I had a habit of sitting with my legs slightly apart, a typical male posture I'd never once thought about. The first time I did it while wearing a knee-length A-line skirt, Lena's correction was swift. "Knees together. L." Her voice was sharp. "Always. Or cross your ankles. A lady is mindful of the space she occupies." I complied, my muscles protesting the unfamiliar position. It felt constricting, vulnerable. But it also forced a kind of poise. There was a discipline to it that I began, grudgingly, to respect. Even my silence was policed. "You don't have to fill every silence," she'd say while we were reading on the couch, me in a cashmere sweater and silk midi skirt she'd chosen. "Be comfortable just being present. There's a strength in quiet observation." The clothes were a key part of the training. Lena slowly replaced the contents of the metal trunk with a carefully curated wardrobe. Nothing was overtly sexy or fetishistic. It was all about elegance and constraint. Soft wool sweaters with wide necklines that threatened to slip off a shoulder. Silk blouses that buttoned up to the neck. Midi skirts that required careful maneuvering to sit down in. And always, the stockings. She insisted on them. She said they changed the way you moved, the way you felt your own skin. She was right. The whisper of nylon against nylon as I walked was a constant, subtle reminder of the role I was playing. The strangest part was my own reaction to it all. I should have been resentful. I should have felt trapped, humiliated. And I did. At times. But those feelings were increasingly drowned out by something else, a deep, profound sense of peace. As Ethan, my life was a constant series of decisions. What to say in a meeting. How to handle a difficult employee. What to invest our savings in. As Elle, I had no decisions to make. Lena decided what I wore, how I sat, how I walked. She decided when Ella appeared and when she vanished. My only job was to obey, to follow the script. And in that surrender, I found a strange kind of quiet. The constant, anxious buzz in the back of my mind went silent. There was no pressure to perform masculinity, to be assertive, to be in charge. There was only the rustle of a skirt, the click of a low heel, and the quiet presence of the woman who was now in complete control of my life. I started to wait for the weekends, not for any kind of thrill, but for the calm. It was a terrifying admission. Even to myself, I was beginning to prefer the cage. I had existed as Ella for about 2 months, living within the confines of our home, when Lena announced the next stage of my education. It was a Saturday morning. She was sipping her coffee, looking at me over the rim of her mug. I was dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue wrap dress, sheer nude stockings, and black patent leather flats. "We're going out," she said. The blood drained from my face, outward. "Shopping," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Your wardrobe is still a bit limited. We need to get you some proper dresses." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Lena, I can't. Someone will see me. They'll know." "Don't be ridiculous," she said, her voice sharp, cutting off my panic. "You look fine. Your makeup is perfect. Your posture is good. No one will look twice, but you will not speak unless I tell you to. You will stay close to me. You will let me handle everything. Do you understand?" I could only nod, my throat too tight to form words. This was a new level of terror. The house was a safe stage. The outside world was an unpredictable audience, and I was certain they would be hostile. She drove us to a part of the city we rarely visited, an area known for its high-end, independent boutiques. She parked in front of a store with a discreet, elegant sign that read velour. The windows displayed a single mannequin in a flowing, artistic-looking gown. It was not a place for the hesitant. Lena got out of the car without a backward glance, confident that I would follow. Taking a shaky breath, I opened my door and stepped out onto the pavement. The 2-inch heels I was wearing, which had felt manageable on our living room floor, now seemed treacherously high on the uneven sidewalk. The slight breeze felt like a hurricane, threatening to reveal the uncomfortable truth of my body beneath the dress. Every passing car, every pedestrian on the other side of the street, felt like an accuser. My ears were ringing. Lena took my hand. Her grip was firm, non-negotiable. Head up, L, shoulders back. She led me through the glass door of velour. A small bell chimed. The interior was hushed, minimalist, and smelled faintly of expensive perfume. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. A single saleswoman, a chic woman in her 50s with sharp geometric haircut, looked up from behind a white counter. "Good morning," she said, her smile polite and professional. "Good morning," Lena replied smoothly, her voice exuding confidence. "My sister and I are looking for a dress for a cocktail party." "Sister!" The word hung in the air. The saleswoman's gaze flickered over me for a fraction of a second. I braced myself for the gasp, the frown of confusion, the call for security. But it never came. Her professional smile didn't waver. "Of course." She said, "Do you have a particular style or color in mind?" She looked at me. Looked right at me. And she saw a woman. Or, at the very least, she was professional enough to pretend she did. The relief was so intense it almost made me buckle. No one was screaming. No one was pointing. The world wasn't ending. Lena did all the talking, describing what she wanted for me. The saleswoman listened, then led us toward a rack of silk and satin dresses. She pulled out a few, holding them up against me. "She has a wonderful figure for a sheath dress," the woman commented to Lena, her tone purely professional, "and her height can carry a longer hemline." That comment was a complex explosion in my mind. On one hand, it was the most humiliating moment of my life. I was a man being discussed like a piece of livestock, my body being appraised for its ability to display clothing. I was a lie, a deception, and they were all buying it. But beneath the shame, a darker, more insidious feeling bloomed a secret, thrilling pulse of pride. I had passed. This stranger, this arbiter of female elegance, had looked at me at Ella and had seen a woman with a wonderful figure. Lena chose 3 dresses for me to try on. The saleswoman showed me to a spacious fitting room with a 3-way mirror and plush carpeting. "Just let me know if you need any help," she said with another smile before pulling the heavy velvet curtain closed. I was alone. I looked at myself in the mirrors. My reflection multiplied into infinity. L, looking terrified, clutching 3 expensive dresses. The lighting in the fitting room was bright, unforgiving. It exposed everything, the slight shadow on my upper lip that the makeup couldn't completely hide, the width of my shoulders, the size of my hands. I felt like a complete fraud. But Lena's instructions echoed in my head. I took off the wrap dress and carefully, my hands shaking, slipped the first new dress over my head. It was a shimmering, pewter-colored satin that clung to every curve the corset created. It was sleeveless, and I was acutely aware of the muscles in my arms. I put on the pair of 12-centimeter heels Lena had insisted I bring, in my bag. I wobbled, catching myself on the wall. I stepped out of the fitting room. Lena was waiting, sitting in a velvet armchair. The saleswoman was nearby, pretending to organize a display of scarves. Lena's eyes scanned me from head to toe. "Turn around," she said. I did a slow, clumsy turn on the dangerously high heels. "It's perfect," Lena declared. "That color is wonderful with her hair," the saleswoman added, her voice warm. "It brings out the warmth in her eyes." My humiliation and my pride were at war inside me, a dizzying, nauseating conflict. I was an imposter being lauded for the quality of my disguise. We bought the dress. As the saleswoman wrapped it in tissue paper and placed it in a glossy bag, she smiled at me again. "I hope you enjoy the party," she said. I just nodded, unable to speak. A silent, grateful, ashamed woman named Elle, walking out of that store, back into the bright afternoon sun. I knew a line had been crossed. I had taken the performance public, and I had been accepted. There was no going back. The door to my old life, my old self, had just swung shut and locked behind me. The trip to Velour marked a fundamental change in our relationship. It was no longer just about Lena controlling a secret part of me. It was now about her crafting and managing a public persona. Our marriage, once a partnership of equals, had been completely reconfigured. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Lena was the director, the guide, the protector. She managed Elle's wardrobe, her schedule, her very existence. She decided if we would accept a dinner invitation from friends, calculating whether the lighting would be too harsh, whether the people would be too observant. She became my gatekeeper. In response, I became entirely dependent on her. I surrendered all decision-making. At work, I would go through the motions, but my mind was often elsewhere, thinking about what Lena had planned for Ella that evening. I found myself asking for her opinion on everything, from small things to large. My own confidence, the easy masculinity I had once projected, had eroded, replaced by a kind of passive watchfulness. I was learning to be receptive, to be guided. In a way, she was sheltering me. As long as I was Elle, and as long as I followed her rules, I was safe from the judgment of the world, and more importantly, from the judgment of myself. Our intimacy changed. Too, it became less about passion, and more about a strange, profound form of care. There were evenings she would spend an hour massaging lotion into my skin, her touch gentle but proprietary, as if tending to a prized possession. She would paint my nails, her focus absolute, choosing colors that were subtle and neutral, pale pinks, beiges, a French manicure. These acts were devoid of the frantic energy of sex, but they were more intimate than anything we had ever shared before. One night, a few months after the shopping trip, she put on a slow song on the stereo in the living room. I was dressed as Elle, wearing a simple black cashmere dress that ended just below the knee. "Dance with me," she said. She didn't wait for an answer. She took my hand and led me to the center of the room. She put one hand on my waist, the corset a rigid barrier between us, and took my other hand in hers. I awkwardly placed my free hand on her shoulder. We began to move, a slow, simple box step. There was no music, just the sound of our breathing and the soft whisper of my stockings as my legs moved. I was stiff at first, hyper-aware of leading, a habit ingrained from years of being the man. "Stop it," she whispered, her voice firm. "Let me lead. Just follow." I forced myself to relax, to stop anticipating the next step. I let my body go slack, allowing her to guide me. I focused on the pressure of her hand on my back, the slight shifts in her weight that told me where to move. It was a complete abdication of control. I was no longer the one in charge, no longer the protector. I was being led. I was being held. We danced in silence for a long time. The rhythm became natural, my body responding to hers without thought. She rested her head against my chest, and I could feel the warmth of her cheek through the cashmere. She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face in the dim light. "Your body," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "It's beautiful when it's cared for." The statement wasn't about desire in the way I had always understood it. It was about aesthetics, about appreciation for the project we were both engaged in. She was the sculptor, and I was the clay, and she was pleased with her work. She leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a demanding, passionate kiss. It was light, soft and exploratory. It was a kiss that didn't ask for anything in return. It wasn't a man kissing a woman, or a woman kissing a man. It was just her kissing me. Kissing this person she had created, this blend of Ethan and Elle, and in that gentle, unclassifiable kiss, the last remaining boundary between my two selves dissolved into nothing. A year passed. The world outside our home continued on its axis, but the world inside had been completely terraformed. The routines Lena had established became ingrained. Second nature. The transformation from Ethan to Elle was no longer a lengthy, ceremonial process. It was a smooth, efficient slide from one reality into another. The physical changes became more permanent, on Lena's suggestion. I had stopped cutting my hair. It grew slowly at first, passing through an awkward stage before finally reaching my shoulders. It was still dark brown, and with Lena's insistence on using expensive shampoos and conditioners, it became soft and healthy. It was my own hair now, not a wig, and the feeling of it brushing against my neck and shoulders was a constant, subtle reminder of the change. My skin, subjected to a nightly regimen of cleansers, serums, and moisturizers that Lena laid out for me, became softer and clearer than it had been since I was a teenager. The regular, meticulous shaving, followed by soothing balms, left my legs and body consistently smooth. My hands, once the calloused, practical hands of a project manager, were now soft, my nails kept at a modest length and always painted in a sheer, neutral polish. My male wardrobe began to shrink. It happened subtly. A pair of old jeans would disappear. A few worn-out t-shirts would vanish from my drawers. Lena never mentioned it. They were just gone. And in their place, more space was created on Elle's side of the closet. That side was now filled with dresses, skirts, silk blouses, and an array of shoes for different occasions. The metal trunk had long since been retired, its contents fully integrated into our shared life. I still went to work as Ethan. I put on one of the few remaining suits, tied a tie, and drove to the office, but I felt like an actor in costume. I would catch my reflection in the glass of the office building and be startled by the man looking back at me. He looked incomplete, uncared for. I would find myself unconsciously checking my posture. Trying to sit with my knees together under my desk, I'd run a hand through my longer hair, a gesture that was becoming increasingly feminine. Elle was no longer just a role I played on the weekends. She was a presence that bled into my weekdays, a filter through which I now saw the world. I noticed the details of women's clothing, the way they carried themselves, the cadence of their speech. I was a student, always learning, always observing. The line between Ethan and Elle was blurring into non-existence. Ethan was the mask I wore for the outside world, a drab, ill-fitting suit required for survival. Elle was the person I was at home, the person who was cared for, the person who was seen. The transformation was no longer just about clothes and makeup. It was seeping into my bones, changing me from the inside out. The moment of crisis came, as it always does. When I was alone, it was a Tuesday evening. Lena was at a work dinner, a rare night where I was left to my own devices. I had come home from the office, the Ethan costume feeling particularly scratchy and false. The first thing I did was shower, washing away the grime of the city and the persona of the day. Afterward, wrapped in a towel, I walked to the vanity. The array of Elle's cosmetics was laid out. A familiar, comforting sight. Without conscious thought, I began my routine. The foundation, the concealer, the soft dusting of powder. My hands moved with a practiced grace I hadn't possessed 2 years ago. I was halfway through applying my eyeliner, my hand steady, my focus absolute. When I truly looked at myself, I mean really looked, past the makeup, past the carefully shaped brows, past the soft skin, I looked into my own eyes. And the question hit me with the force of a physical impact. Who am I? The face in the mirror offered no easy answer. It wasn't the face of Ethan Walker, the man with the sensible haircut and the tired eyes who managed construction projects. The sharp edges of that man had been sanded down, polished away. But it wasn't entirely the face of a woman, either. Beneath the artifice, the bone structure was still mine, the shadows were still mine. I was a composite, a paradox, a being who existed in the space between genders. I was neither, and I was both. I put down the eyeliner, my hand trembling slightly. For 2 years, I had been swept along by Lena's will. So grateful for the release from my own internal conflict that I never stopped to question the destination. I had traded the prison of my secret for the gilded cage of her control. But what had it made me? Was Elle a truer version of myself, brought to life by Lena's guidance, or was she just a more elaborate, more beautiful costume than the one I had been wearing before? The man I used to be was gone. I could never go back to him. The thought of cutting my hair, of letting my skin grow rough, of packing away Ella's clothes and pretending none of this had ever happened, felt like an amputation. It would be a denial of the only peace I had ever known. But who was this person I had become? This quiet, passive, carefully curated creature? Was this strength, or the ultimate form of weakness? I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. Lena was home early. A few moments later, she appeared in the bedroom doorway. She took in the scene, me sitting at the vanity, half made up, my expression lost. She walked over and stood behind me, her presence a familiar weight in the room. She didn't ask what was wrong. She seemed to understand immediately. She placed her hands on my shoulders, her grip firm and reassuring. We both looked at my reflection in the mirror, at the conflicted, lost person staring back. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but certain. It cut through my confusion like a beam of light. "You're the most real you have ever been," she said. And I didn't know if it was the most profound truth I had ever heard, or the most terrifying lie. So, here I am, sitting at a vanity that is now mine more than it is hers, recounting a story that has no clear hero or villain. Lena's words from that night still echo in my head. Was she right? Am I this person who is neither Ethan nor fully Elle? The most authentic version of myself? Perhaps she is. Perhaps the man I was before Ethan Walker. Husband. Project manager was just a rough draft, a clumsy sketch of a person I was supposed to be. A role I played because it was the only one I knew, the only one society offered. I lived my life in a small dark closet of my own making, suffocated by a secret I thought would destroy me. Lena didn't destroy me, she just blasted the door off the closet. But what did she lead me into? Is this freedom? Or is it simply a larger, more beautifully decorated prison? A cage with silk linings and cashmere walls, but a cage nonetheless. I am cared for, I am protected, and I am seen. But my choices are not my own. My identity was not discovered. It was assigned. The name on my lips, the clothes on my body, the way I walk through the world, all of it was chosen for me. Sometimes I think I am the subject of the greatest psychological experiment ever conducted, a one-man study in the malleability of identity. Other times, I feel like I have finally been given permission to become the person I was always meant to be, and that Lena, for all her control and manipulation, was the catalyst I needed. Perhaps control isn't always a chain. Perhaps, sometimes, it can be the key that unlocks a door you were too afraid to open on your own. I don't have the answers. My life is no longer painted in shades of beige. It is a complex tapestry of satin and steel, of submission and grace, of shame and pride. Lena is calling my name from the other room. Her voice is calm, expectant. It's time to get ready. We're going out tonight. She has a new dress she wants me to wear. I pick up the eyeliner. My hand is steady now. I look at the person in the mirror, this creation of our shared, strange love. I am her masterpiece. I am her possession. I am myself. The old life is over. The curtain came down on Ethan Walker that Tuesday afternoon, but for Elle, The show is just beginning, and this time, it feels as though the curtain will never close again.